The Montana sky stretched endlessly above the Morrison Ranch, painted in the deep blues and purples of dawn. Ayanna Whitefeather knelt beside the vegetable garden, her calloused hands pulling weeds with practiced efficiency. At 23, she possessed the quiet grace of her Cherokee mother and the determined spirit of her Irish father, though both had been buried in the small cemetery behind the ranch 3 years ago. Ayanna. The harsh voice of Mrs. Morrison cut through the morning air like a whip crack. Get inside and start breakfast. Mr. Morrison has business to discuss. Ayanna rose slowly, brushing dirt from her worn calico dress. The fabric had once been blue, but years of washing and mending had faded it to the color of winter sky. She'd sewn it herself from scraps Mrs. Morrison had deemed too poor for her own use. Inside the ranch house kitchen, Ayanna moved with quiet efficiency, stoking the fire and preparing coffee. Through the thin walls, she could hear heated voices from the parlor. I'm telling you, Morrison, the bank won't extend the loan again, came the voice of Mr. Hartwell, the banker from Billings. You're 3 months behind, and with the cattle prices falling. There has to be something. Morrison's voice was desperate. This ranch has been in my family for 15 years. Sell what you can. Cattle, horses, equipment. Maybe you can pay off enough to keep the house and a few acres. Ayanna's hands stilled on the coffee pot. She'd known the ranch was struggling. The signs had been there for months. Fewer hands hired for roundup, repairs left undone, the constant worry lines etched deeper into Morrison's weathered face. What about the girl? Mrs. Morrison's voice was sharp, calculating. She's been eating our food and taking up space for 3 years. Surely she's worth something. Ayanna's blood ran cold. She pressed herself against the kitchen wall, straining to hear. Martha, you can't be serious, Morrison said, but his voice lacked conviction. Why not? Her parents owed us money when they died. We took her in out of Christian charity, but times are hard. There are men who'd pay good money for a young woman, especially one who can cook and clean. She's not property, Martha. Isn't she? Who's going to speak for a half-breed with no family? The law certainly won't protect her kind. Ayanna closed her eyes, fighting back tears. She'd always known her position in the Morrison household was precarious. Neither white nor fully Cherokee, she belonged nowhere in the rigid social structure of 1889 Montana. Her parents had worked the Morrison Ranch for years, her father as a horse trainer and her mother as a healer who tended both animals and people with her knowledge of traditional Cherokee medicine. When influenza took both her parents in the winter of 1886, the Morrisons had allowed her to stay, but made it clear she was there on sufferance. She worked from dawn to dusk, received no wages, and slept in a small room off the kitchen that was barely larger than a closet. The cattle auction is next week in Billings, Mrs. Morrison continued. We could include her with the livestock. Make it seem like we're selling her contract, not her person. Perfectly legal. Ayanna's hands trembled as she poured coffee into 3 cups. She'd heard whispers of such things, young women, especially those of mixed heritage or without family protection, being sold under the guise of work contracts or indenture agreements. It was slavery by another name, but the law turned a blind eye when it came to people like her. She carried the coffee tray to the parlor, keeping her eyes downcast as she served the men. Neither Morrison nor Hartwell acknowledged her presence, but Mrs. Morrison watched her with calculating eyes. Think about it, Morrison, Hartwell said, accepting his coffee. You need every dollar you can get. The auction is in 5 days. After the banker left, Ayanna continued her morning chores, but her mind raced. She had no money, no relatives, nowhere to run. The nearest Cherokee reservation was hundreds of miles away, and even there she might not be welcomed. Her mixed heritage made her an outsider in both worlds. That evening, as she prepared dinner, Morrison approached her in the kitchen. His face was haggard, aged beyond his 50 years. Ayanna, he began, then stopped, unable to meet her eyes. I want you to know, your parents were good people. Your father was the best horse trainer I ever had. She continued stirring the stew, waiting. Times are hard, he said finally. Harder than they've ever been. I'm sorry, girl. I truly am. Ayanna looked up at him then, seeing the defeat in his eyes. When? She asked quietly. Saturday. The cattle auction in Billings. She nodded, her face showing none of the terror that gripped her heart. I understand, Mr. Morrison. That night, alone in her small room, Ayanna knelt on the rough wooden floor and whispered a prayer in Cherokee, the language her mother had taught her in secret. She prayed to the spirits of her ancestors for strength, for dignity, for the courage to face whatever was coming. She would not run. She would not beg. She would face her fate with the pride of both her peoples, even if the world saw her as belonging to neither. Outside her window, the Montana wind howled across the plains, carrying with it the promise of change. The Billings cattle auction was a sprawling affair that drew ranchers, buyers, and spectators from across Montana territory. The air was thick with dust, the smell of livestock, and the constant noise of lowing cattle, shouting men, and the auctioneer's rapid-fire calls. Ayanna sat in the back of the Morrison wagon, her hands folded in her lap, watching the chaos with outward calm. Mrs. Morrison had insisted she wear her best dress, a faded brown wool that had belonged to the Morrisons' deceased daughter. It hung loose on Ayanna's slender frame and made her olive skin look sallow, which Ayanna suspected was intentional. "Remember," Mrs. Morrison hissed as they approached the auction grounds, "you're being sold as a work contract. 5 years of service to pay off your parents' debts. It's all legal and proper." Ayanna said nothing. They both knew it was a lie wrapped in legal language, but pointing that out would only make things worse. The livestock auction was in full swing when they arrived. Cattle were herded through a series of pens while the auctioneer called out prices and buyers shouted their bids. Morrison led Ayanna to a small platform near the back of the main auction area, where a sign read, "Miscellaneous Lots." "Lot 47, the auctioneer announced as Morrison pushed Ayanna forward. "Work contract for domestic service. 5-year term. Girl comes with cooking, cleaning, and basic medical skills." Ayanna stepped onto the platform, her chin raised despite the humiliation burning in her chest. The crowd that gathered was smaller than for the cattle, but no less cruel. She could see the hunger in some men's eyes, the disgust in others, and the cold calculation of those who saw her as nothing more than a commodity. "What's her breeding?" called out a man in a dirty hat. "Half Cherokee, half Irish," Morrison replied reluctantly. The crowd erupted in jeers and crude comments. "Half-breed ain't worth the price of a sick cow. Who wants a savage in their house? Probably got diseases from her Indian side." Ayanna forced herself to remain still, to keep her expression neutral even as the words cut deep. She focused on a point beyond the crowd, remembering her mother's teachings about finding strength in stillness. "What am I bid for this lot?" the auctioneer called, clearly eager to move on to more profitable items. $50, called a man with tobacco-stained teeth and clothes that reeked of whiskey. 75. This from a rancher Ayanna recognized as having a reputation for cruelty to his workers. The bidding continued, but the amounts were insultingly low. Ayanna could see Mrs. Morrison's face growing red with anger. Clearly, she'd expected more money for her merchandise. $150, called a voice from the back. The crowd turned to see Jake Murdoch, a man known for his violent temper and his treatment of the women who worked in his saloon. Ayanna's stomach clenched with fear. Going once at $150. The auctioneer began. $5,000. The voice cut through the noise like a blade, silencing the entire auction ground. Every head turned toward the source of the bid, and Ayanna saw a tall man in a black coat pushing through the crowd. Even from a distance, she could see the quality of his clothes, the confident way he carried himself. William Blackstone. Every person in Montana territory knew that name. Owner of the largest ranch in the state, he was said to be worth more than some small towns. But more than his wealth, he was known for his integrity, his fair treatment of workers, and his refusal to engage in the corrupt practices that plagued many large ranchers. The crowd parted before him like water, whispers following in his wake. Did he say 5,000? That's more than most people make in 10 years. What's Blackstone want with a half-breed girl? Well, Blackstone stepped up to the platform, his gray eyes meeting Ayanna's directly. She saw no hunger there, no cruelty, but something else she couldn't quite identify. Respect, perhaps. Or recognition. $5,000, he repeated clearly. Cash. The auctioneer stammered, clearly overwhelmed. That is, going once, going twice, sold to Mr. William Blackstone. The crowd erupted in confused chatter, but Will ignored them all. He stepped onto the platform and approached Ayanna, removing his hat respectfully. "Miss Whitefeather," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet auction ground. "I want to make something very clear to everyone here. I did not buy you. I bought your freedom." Ayanna stared at him in shock, unable to process what she was hearing. Will reached into his coat and withdrew a small velvet box. From it, he took a gold ring set with a simple but elegant sapphire. "If you'll accept it, I'm also offering you my name and my protection. You would be my wife by choice, not by obligation. You're free to refuse and walk away with my blessing." The auction ground was dead silent now. Ayanna could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. This man, This powerful, respected man was offering her not just freedom but dignity. Marriage, not servitude. She looked into his eyes and saw sincerity there, and something else that made her breath catch. He was looking at her not as a half-breed, not as damaged goods, but as a woman worthy of respect. "Why?" she whispered, the word barely audible. Will's voice carried as he answered, ensuring everyone could hear. "Because every person deserves to be free. Because you've shown more dignity in the last 10 minutes than most of these men have shown in their entire lives. And because I believe you and I could build something good together." Ayanna felt tears prick her eyes, but for the first time in years, they weren't tears of pain or humiliation. They were tears of hope. She extended her hand, and Will gently slipped the ring onto her finger. "Yes," she said, her voice growing stronger. "Yes, I accept." The crowd exploded into chaos, but Ayanna barely heard it. All she could see was the man who had just changed her life forever. The small church in Billings had never seen a wedding quite like this one. Word had spread quickly through the town about William Blackstone's dramatic gesture at the cattle auction, and curious onlookers filled every pew. Some came out of genuine interest, others hoping for scandal or spectacle. Ayanna stood in the church's small anteroom, wearing a simple but elegant blue dress that Will had purchased for her from the town's finest dressmaker. It was the most beautiful garment she'd ever owned, and it fit her perfectly. Mrs. Henderson, the dressmaker, had worked through the night to alter it, muttering under her breath about the strange ways of rich men. "You don't have to do this," Will had told her that morning when they'd met with Reverend Matthews to arrange the ceremony. "The offer of freedom stands regardless. You can take the train anywhere you want to go, and I'll provide you with enough money to start fresh." But Ayanna had looked into his eyes and seen something that made her want to stay, want to discover what kind of man would spend a fortune to free a stranger. Now, as she prepared to walk down the aisle, her hands trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from the overwhelming realization that her life was about to change completely. The church doors opened, and she saw Will standing at the altar in a black suit, his hat in his hands. Beside him stood his foreman, Tom Bradley, a weathered man who'd worked for the Blackstone family for 20 years. Tom's presence surprised her. She'd expected Will to stand alone, given the controversial nature of this marriage. As she walked down the aisle, Ayanna was acutely aware of the whispers and stares from the congregation. She heard fragments of conversation. "Shame, a man like that marrying a half-breed. Must be something wrong with him. Pretty enough, I suppose, if you like that sort." But she also saw other faces, a few women who looked at her with sympathy, some men who nodded respectfully, and in the back, an elderly Cherokee woman who smiled and touched her heart in a gesture of blessing. When she reached the altar, Will stepped forward and offered her his arm. "You look beautiful," he said quietly, and she could tell he meant it. Reverend Matthews, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to refuse William Blackstone, began the ceremony. His voice was stiff and formal, but the words were the same ones that had joined countless couples before them. "Do you, William James Blackstone, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part?" "I do," Will said firmly, his voice carrying to every corner of the church. "And do you, Ayanna Whitefeather, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part?" Ayanna looked into Will's gray eyes and saw patience there, and kindness, and something deeper that she was only beginning to understand. "I do," she said, her voice clear and strong. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, Will leaned down and kissed her gently, respectfully. It was Ayanna's first kiss, and it was nothing like the brutal advances she'd feared from other men. It was tender, almost reverent. The congregation erupted in a mixture of applause and scandalized whispers as the newly married couple walked back down the aisle together. Outside the church, Will helped Ayanna into an elegant carriage, another surprise. She'd expected to ride back to his ranch in a simple wagon. "Where are we going?" she asked as they pulled away from the church. "Home," Will said simply. "To the Blackstone Ranch. But first, I want to show you something." They rode in comfortable silence through the Montana countryside, the vast sky stretching endlessly above them. After about an hour, Will directed the driver to stop near a small hill overlooking a valley. "Would you walk with me?" he asked. They climbed the hill together, and at the top, Ayanna gasped. Spread out below them was the most beautiful ranch she'd ever seen. Rolling pastures dotted with cattle, a large ranch house that looked more like a mansion, barns and outbuildings that spoke of prosperity and careful management. "It's magnificent," she breathed. "It's yours now too," Will said. But that's not what I wanted to show you. He pointed to a section of the valley where she could see what looked like a small village. Those are the workers' quarters. Every family that works for me has their own house, their own garden plot. Their children go to the school I built, and when they're sick, they're treated by the doctor I keep on retainer. Ayana looked at him with growing understanding. You treat them fairly. I try to. My father taught me that a man's worth isn't measured by how much he can take from others, but by how much he can give. We'll turn to face her. Ayana, I need you to understand something. I didn't marry you out of pity or charity. I married you because I've been watching you for months. Her eyes widened in surprise. I've seen you at the Morrison Ranch when I've had business there. I've seen how you carry yourself with dignity despite how they treat you. I've seen your kindness to animals, your skill with healing. My foreman Tom told me about the time you saved his horse when the vet said it was hopeless. Will took her hands in his. I've been looking for a partner, someone who understands that strength comes from character, not from the color of your skin or the circumstances of your birth. I believe you could be that partner. Ayana felt tears streaming down her face. I don't understand. You could have any woman you wanted. Why me? Will smiled, and for the first time she saw vulnerability in his expression. Because you're the only woman I've ever met who I believe could see me for who I really am, not just what I own. Because you understand what it means to be judged unfairly. And because... He paused, seeming to gather courage. Because I've been half in love with you since the first time I saw you refuse to bow your head when Mrs. Morrison was berating you. As the sun set over the Montana plains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Ayana realized that her new life was just beginning. And for the first time since her parents died, she felt truly hopeful about the future. 3 months had passed since the wedding that shocked Montana territory, and Ayana was still adjusting to her new life as Mrs. William Blackstone. The ranch house, which had seemed impossibly grand from a distance, had become home in ways she'd never expected. Will had been true to his word about giving her space and time. She had her own bedroom in the east wing of the house, beautifully furnished with items he'd ordered from Denver and San Francisco. But more importantly, he'd given her purpose and respect. On this particular morning, Ayana was in the ranch's medical clinic, a small building Will had constructed after learning of her healing skills. She was tending to Maria Santos, the pregnant wife of one of the ranch hands, when Will appeared in the doorway. How is she? He asked quietly in Spanish, a language Ayana had been surprised to learn he spoke fluently. The baby is positioned well, Ayana replied, also in Spanish. But she needs rest. The work in the fields is too much for her now. Will nodded and turned to Maria. Take the rest of the week off. Full pay. When the baby comes, you and Carlos will have a month to adjust before you need to think about work. Maria's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. Senor Blackstone, you are too kind. After Maria left, Will lingered in the clinic watching Ayana organize her supplies. She transformed the space into something that rivaled any doctor's office in Billings, combining traditional Cherokee remedies with modern medical knowledge. The men are talking, Will said finally. Ayana looked up from her work. About what? About how you saved young Jimmy Patterson's life last week when he was kicked by that horse. About how you've helped 3 difficult births in the past month. About how you treat everyone, white, Mexican, Cherokee, with the same care and respect. Ayana felt heat rise in her cheeks. I only do what my mother taught me. Your mother taught you well. Will stepped closer. But it's more than that, Ayana. You have a gift and you're using it to help people. The workers' families trust you completely. Over the months, Ayana had indeed become the unofficial doctor for the ranch community. Word had spread beyond the Blackstone Ranch, and people traveled from neighboring spreads to seek her help. Will had supported her completely, even building a larger clinic and ordering medical supplies from back east. There's something else, Will continued. I've been thinking about expanding the school. The ranch school was another of Will's innovations. He'd hired a teacher from Boston to educate not just the children of his workers, but any child in the area whose parents wanted them to learn. What kind of expansion? Ayana asked. I want to add classes for adults. Reading, writing, basic mathematics. And... He paused, seeming uncertain for the first time in months. I was hoping you might teach about Cherokee culture and healing traditions. Ayana stared at him in amazement. You want me to teach Cherokee ways? Here? Why not? This is Montana territory, not Boston society. Out here, knowledge is valuable regardless of where it comes from. Your healing methods work. Your understanding of the land and its plants could benefit everyone. That evening, they sat on the wide porch of the ranch house, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. It had become their routine, this quiet time together at the end of each day. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they simply enjoyed the peaceful silence. "Will," Ayana said finally, "may I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Why have you never married before? You're 35, successful, respected. Surely there were women." Will was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the vast expanse of his land. There were women who were interested in William Blackstone's money and status, but none who seemed interested in just Will. He turned to look at her. "After my parents died, I inherited all of this when I was 25. Suddenly, every unmarried woman in 3 territories was eager to make my acquaintance. But I could see it in their eyes. They saw the ranch, the cattle, the bank accounts. They didn't see me." "And you think I see you?" Ayana asked softly. "I know you do. Because you married me when you thought I might be just another man looking to own you. You've seen me lose my temper with incompetent suppliers, seen me worry about sick cattle, seen me struggle with decisions that affect hundreds of people. You've seen me at my worst and my best, and you're still here." Ayana felt her heart skip. Over the months, her feelings for Will had grown from gratitude to genuine affection to something deeper that she was only now beginning to acknowledge. "Will," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to tell you something." He turned to face her fully, giving her his complete attention. "When I married you, I thought I was trading one form of servitude for another. I thought you were being kind, but that eventually you'd expect payment for your kindness." Will's face darkened. "Ayana, I would never." "I know that now," she interrupted gently. "That's what I'm trying to tell you. You've shown me what it means to be truly respected, truly valued. You've given me not just freedom, but purpose. You've made me feel like I belong somewhere for the first time since my parents died." She reached over and took his hand. "I'm not the same woman you married 3 months ago. That woman was grateful and scared and didn't believe she deserved happiness. This woman is falling in love with her husband." Will's eyes widened, and Ayana saw hope bloom in his expression. "Ayana, I know this wasn't a love match," she continued. "I know you married me to save me and I married you to survive. But somewhere along the way it became something more. At least for me." Will stood and pulled her to her feet, his hands gentle on her arms. "For me too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been falling in love with you since our wedding day, but I didn't want to pressure you, didn't want you to feel obligated." "I don't feel obligated," Ayana said, stepping closer to him. "I feel grateful and happy, and for the first time in my life I feel like I'm exactly where I belong." When Will kissed her this time, it wasn't the gentle, respectful kiss of their wedding day. It was the kiss of a man who had found his match, his partner, his equal. And when Ayana kissed him back, it was with the passion of a woman who had finally found her home. As the stars appeared in the vast Montana sky, they stood together on their porch, no longer strangers bound by circumstance, but partners bound by choice and growing love. In the distance, a coyote howled and Ayana smiled. She was no longer the frightened young woman who had stood on an auction block. She was Ayana Blackstone, healer, teacher, and beloved wife. She had found her place in the world, and it was right here, in the arms of the man who had seen her worth when no one else would. The future stretched before them, full of possibility and promise, under the endless Montana sky.